More media. Wrestlemania is just days away. The biggest drawing card in the recent history of American pro wrestling may, but probably won't, make his final U.S. appearance on Sunday. But all the main news is in a different direction. There were a lot of shakeups Monday in the hierarchy of World Championship Wrestling. Bill Shaw, the head of personnel at Turner Broadcasting and a member of the Turner board, has replaced Jack Petrick as president of the WCW and top overseer. Officially, Petrick is said to be no longer in charge of the wrestling company because he'll be working full-time on a 24-hour cartoon cable channel that Turner is in the process of putting together. Shaw then appointed Bob Dew, who runs the Omni Arena, and to be the executive overseer of the company, which would be the person Kip Fry reports to. Expect more media stories on the variety of different scandals involving the WWF over the next few weeks. As of press time, it appeared that Geraldo Rivera's Now It Can Be Told show would be airing this coming Friday. Since the date has changed several times, one can never be sure. There have been many maneuverings over the past week in regard to this story. The main one is that Tom Cole's attorney, Alan Fuchsberg, gained a restraining order against the show to air the interview they did with Cole prior to Cole returning to work full-time with the WWF. Apparently Cole and the show signed a contract that the interview would air after the filing of the lawsuit, since Cole apparently promised the show that his filing would be days away and the show was scheduled to be several weeks away at the time of the contract signing. The CBS Evening News with Dan Rather had a 4.5-minute segment planned for Friday as well. The 2020 piece, which at first was thought to have had potential devastating implications and now, after everything else has broken, surely will seem exceedingly mild, is scheduled to run sometime in April, and we should have a date in next week's issue. Several other media sources have done preliminary work on the story, ranging from the most unrespected to the most respected television news shows, but those stories could be anywhere from weeks to months away if they are even followed up on. The Montel Williams Show, which was considering a panel discussion type show similar to Donahue, decided against doing the show because they felt Donahue had already covered the subject. The major breaking developments over the past week were 3 different column mentions by Phil Mushnick in the New York Post, on Wednesday, Friday, and Monday respectively. In what appeared to have been a reaction to the negative publicity in the Post, there was a full-page ad in the rival Sunday New York Daily News with a photo of a wrestler surrounded by handicapped children. I believe the wrestler was Jim Duggan, with a large headline saying, "Thanks WWF for 7 years of love and kindness," attributed to Dominic Della Rocca Kea, Community Mayors of New York. The photo cutline stated, "Each year in New York, the World Wrestling Federation hosts a special benefit in conjunction with the Community Mayors of New York." Over 126,000 handicapped children have been entertained by top WWF superstars at these events. This, in the business world, is known as calling in your markers. Again, rather than honestly face the issues, it's a form of gamesmanship. It also puts into new light a lot of the charitable work done by the WWF over the years. All this charitable work over the years, supposedly done without publicity purposes in mind, is now being used specifically to attempt to rebuild the company's sagging public image. In addition, the company sponsored a symposium in New York on Tuesday on anabolic steroids with Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale, the Canadian physician mentioned here the past several weeks. All the major media was invited, and contrary to what has been reported elsewhere, at least 3 members of the wrestling media, myself being one of them, were invited, although the vast majority were neither invited nor alerted. I didn't attend, but did have 2 lengthy interviews with Di Pasquale the next day. Thus far, the only mention, besides Mushnick's column, was a short in Wednesday's USA Today, which immediately came under heavy criticism for running the short when it had ignored all scandalous stories regarding the WWF up to this point. In addition, the short directly contradicted another story regarding doping drugs in the same sports section on the same day of the same newspaper. The short item read, "The World Wrestling Federation will try to put a body slam on steroid use by its wrestlers with what it billed Tuesday as a state-of-the-art drug program. We will be the standard bearer to all of sports, pro and amateur, to follow in terms of their type of procedures," WWF President Vince McMahon said of the nearly $1 million program scheduled to begin May 1st. McMahon said tests last November showed nearly 50% of wrestlers used anabolic steroids. He says the number is down to 15% in testing done this month. The program's new director, Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale, promised to erase all future use with his testing procedures. "The level of sophistication to beat this drug test is not there. I can't even beat the test," said Di Pasquale, author of numerous books on drug use by athletes. The WWF will be clean in May, beyond IOC, International Olympic Committee, standards. Wrestlers will face a 6-week suspension without pay for a first offense, followed by 3-month suspension. A third positive test would result in dismissal. However, in the same sports section in a story entitled, Experts, IOC Not Ready for Blood Testing, it referred to certain drugs such as EPO, a hormone used to increase red blood cells, HGH, human growth hormone, and HCG, a drug which isn't a steroid, derived from pregnant women's urine to stimulate the body's production of testosterone while on steroid, as having no tests in existence to detect those substances. On Wednesday, Mushnick, who didn't attend, wrote, "The twisted men of the World Wrestling Federation know no limits." With many of its stars, as well as owner Vince McMahon named in a federal trial last year as recipients of steroids, and with ex-WWFers coming out of the woodwork to tell of steroid abuse encouraged and rewarded by the WWF, and with the introduction of McMahon's made-for-TV World Bodybuilding Federation, McMahon, yesterday, conducted a steroid symposium for naive, unsuspecting and credibility-free members of the media. The press release/invite to the symposium contained all the spin-doctored baloney that those familiar with the WWF's practiced evils have come to expect. The main presenter, read the release, will be Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale, one of the world's foremost experts on steroids. Last week's Village Voice identified the Canadian doctor as celebrated by steroid abusers throughout North America as an expert in beating drug tests. Di Pasquale's periodicals read like tip sheets for steroid junkies. Indeed, their clear target readership is neither physicians nor legitimate steroid patients. Instead, they're aimed at athletes. In the same press release, the following question is asked: what research is being done to show the therapeutic treatment of steroids in muscle degenerative diseases like multiple sclerosis? Oh, so that's it. The WWF's steroid use was merely an experiment to aid in the research of muscle disease. What in the world does treatment of multiple sclerosis have to do with steroid abuse by pro wrestlers and bodybuilders? The answer is not a thing. The same answer to the question, how much of what the WWF says is true? The WWF and WBF are desperate to maintain the outrageous physiques of their stars under a cloak of legitimacy. Just another McMahon con. And the targets of these cons, as usual, is America's TV-trained children and adolescents. Meanwhile, more highly damaging info on the WWF's ongoing drug and sex scandal is expected to be revealed early next week on CH4's Now It Can Be Told. McMahon says producer Brooks Skulski has been desperately trying to use legal maneuverings to prevent that show from airing. On Friday, Mushnick came back with, Vince McMahon, whose scandal-soaked World Wrestling Federation will babysit 1 million or more American children this weekend, appeared 2 weeks ago on Larry King's CNN show to refute growing charges that the WWF is lousy with drug and sex abuse and sexual harassment. King asked McMahon the following, "You're saying there's no steroid use in the WWF?" Answered McMahon, "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying." But 11 days later, this past Tuesday, at Symposium Public Relations Con, he held on steroid usage, McMahon said the WWF's initial tests showed slightly less than 50% of his wrestlers tested positive for steroids, but that his latest testing showed approximately 15% of his wrestlers tested positive. If you're scoring at home, McMahon said 2 weeks ago on national TV that steroid use in the WWF was 0%, but this week, said McMahon, those testing positive for steroids is at 15%. So the number was about 50% before McMahon's appearance on King, 0% on the night he appeared with King, and now it's 15%. Think this guy has a little trouble with the truth? McMahon may think of himself as Pinocchio in a cartoon world, but he has a real-life problem. The problem goes by the name of McMahon Vince. He's forever stuck with his outrageous lies because if he ever decides to tell the truth, and it's doubtful he's capable, it's way too late. Mushnick's final tidbit of the week on Monday said, "Where there's fire, there's more fire." In July, well before Vince McMahon's WWF began to take big-time heat for allegations of sexual misconduct and rampant drug abuse, McMahon became the object of a lawsuit. That suit was filed by Jim Stewart, McMahon's longtime limo driver, bodyguard and confidant. Stewart's suit, among other things, alleges that he was fired in retaliation for his refusal to maintain a posture of conscious avoidance regarding the illegal, immoral and unconscionable conduct he had witnessed. The suit, filed in Connecticut, is pending. I don't have details of the symposium, but did talk at length with Di Pasquale about steroids. Di Pasquale, who has been known as one of the experts in North America at beating steroid tests, unveiled a series of theories to upgrade steroid testing. His theories included measuring many different levels in the body as a way to detect and determine if foreign substances are being ingested or injected. The concepts appear to be theoretical rather than proven, and have not been used in drug testing by any other athletic organization. Di Pasquale said that by May 1st, all the wrestlers and bodybuilders working for Titan Sports had better be free of steroids, growth hormones, clenbuterol, cocaine, marijuana and other drugs, or they would be caught and suspended. He said the only way for drug testing which he has been opposed to for years, to work as legitimately balancing the playing field, allowing those who don't use steroids to not be penalized competitively for choosing that path, is to turn the place into a Gestapo state. He talked about testing with absolutely no warning at any time, whether in the gym, in the restaurant, at the motel, at home or at the arena, where all tests currently take place for wrestlers. Because some drugs have such a short life in the body, supposedly there is a new popular steroid, I believe from Greece, that has become popular with US athletes training for the Summer Olympics because it can only be detected for 8 hours after usage. Even the knowledge that testing can only be done at the arena, even if it can be done at any time, allows guys to time some use of steroids and slip through the cracks of the test. The WWF wrestlers received warning last week that marijuana is now on the banned substances list they can be suspended for, which I'm sure doesn't sit well for a lot of guys since many use the drug as a relaxing tool to help get to sleep with all the pain and discomfort from the physical abuse of the RIT. DePasquale said he was going to discuss with McMahon ways to ease the travel schedule for the wrestlers to allow them to maintain a decent physique without steroids and also sending them food on the road rather than having them eat restaurant food. He also talked of encouraging the wrestlers to avoid alcohol and pot because they serve to lower the testosterone level, which I'm sure is advice that most wrestlers will take to heart. DePasquale said that while there are still some wrestlers obviously on steroids as the results from the last steroid test, he gave the figure at 15% who failed, the same figure McMahon released several weeks ago to myself and the Los Angeles Times and again used the figure at the symposia. Showed, and you can tell by looking at some of them, he claimed all the bodybuilders under contract were clean and have been for the past 4 weeks. That's a statement that everyone I've spoken with in strength training circles dismisses as an impossibility, including one person who told me point blank he knew as a fact wasn't true in regard to one of the bodybuilders. He felt that none of the wrestlers would try to beat his test because he believed the wrestlers don't have the sophistication in regards to use of steroids. He also felt some of the bodybuilders would try to beat the test and would fail and be suspended. He said that the pro bodybuilders have incredible sophistication in regard to steroid usage and their knowledge of steroids is better than 99.9% of doctors. DePasquale is not anti-steroids, and in fact, said they were as safe as birth control pills, which are actually contraceptive steroids. That's a view that a lot of bodybuilders like to hear and embrace, which has made him a popular doctor in muscle circles and a regular columnist in Muscle Mag International. Virtually every doctor and even some steroid gurus I've spoken with disagree with that viewpoint. Some have said that the initial birth control pills were no safer than steroids, but that improvements have been made in birth control pills while steroid technology has stood still in comparison, and there is no comparison in the safety of the two today. Even if DePasquale is correct, he admits that in practical use they aren't as safe because women don't take 20 to 100 times the recommended daily dosage of birth control pills like many athletes do of steroids. He also believes heavy doses of steroids aren't needed for performance enhancement and that moderate doses lead to tremendous improvements in athletic prowess with minimal side effects, but that it would be impossible to legislate use of moderate doses without people using extreme doses to get more of an advantage, which would lead to health problems. He also emphatically stated the health problems of former athletes like Steve Corson, Lyle Alzado and Billy Graham were not steroid-related and in fact, wouldn't entertain the notion even with Graham's 20 years of heavy use with little time cycling off. Indeed, he felt that there is a chance the onset of Graham's problems may have been delayed by his heavy use of steroids since steroids can help in the treatment of arthritis. Yes, I know Graham doesn't have arthritis even though he has joint problems from avascular necrosis. When I challenged his claim that steroid testing balances the playing field when a company still encourages steroid use to get hired by its choice of recent new employees, DePasquale said that when the guys got off steroids it evens everything out and said whatever gains in strength and size are made on steroids are lost when the person gets off steroid, something that has been proven in many studies not to be the case at all. On the other hand, he also laughed at some of the claims regarding the current WWF testing procedure which McMahon has billed many times as unbeatable and the best test in all of sports. He said the current test is nothing but the same test the IOC uses. He said that it isn't a bad test, but has all the same flaws that he's pointed out for years in his publications. In theory, an athlete who fails the IOC test is then suspended for a lengthy period of time, dependent upon the strictness of the rules of the country's amateur sports governing body, generally 2 to 4 years. In wrestling, the theoretical suspensions are much shorter, 6 weeks for first offense. However, the problem to all this are all the contradictions once again that have come forward regarding the current testing enforcement. Before the steroid testing began, McMahon said, at least to me, the first steroid test, which took place on November 13 in New Haven, would be simply to see how widespread the problem is, and there would be no penalties involved. However, anyone failing the second test or any test thereafter would be penalized. On Entertainment Tonight on November 18, which was taped after the first test, McMahon said that anyone, no matter how big a star they were, if they failed the test, which certainly appeared to mean the first test, but perhaps his quote was taken out of context for the show, and he meant subsequent test, would be gone. Later, after 50%, by his own figures, failed the first test, he amended his previous statement that anyone whose levels of steroids didn't drop would be suspended. He definitely had meetings with at least several wrestlers, if not every wrestler, who failed the first test and told them that their levels had to decrease in subsequent testing, and the wrestlers, at least a few of them, parroted the same line that the levels had to continue to drop, even though 3 wrestlers told me in December that many of the guys were banding together for their right to continue to use steroids, figuring McMahon couldn't suspend 20 or 40 guys at one. At the Royal Rumble, steroid use appeared to be pretty darn significant, but a few weeks later there did seem to be a change in a lot of the wrestlers, so either the guys backed down, or quit using certain drugs and thus couldn't maintain their physical peak and thus looked off. The problem is, according to Di Pasquale, the technology isn't there to detect levels of steroids with any accuracy, only the fact that there are steroids. The only exception would be testosterone, which is judged by levels, which can easily be tampered with by shooting epitestosterone up to give a false level in the current testing. However, it is impossible to get off testosterone and still have the levels constantly decrease, because several weeks after getting off testosterone, the body's own production kicks in, and the level will shoot to limits that would test a positive in the test, known in the trade as either the rebound or bounce back effect, and is generally what catches the unsuspecting athletes who do fail drug tests even though they believe they've gotten off testosterone in more than enough time to clear their system. So anyone using a testosterone, which I suspect would have been most of the WWF wrestlers at some point, would, if they actually got off the drug, at some point if the tests were regular, which they have been this year, gone through a bounce-back phase, and thus their levels would increase and they'd be suspended. Since there has yet to be even one suspension for steroid policy violations in the WWF, none of this adds up. What McMahon claimed he was looking for in the current test results is something his new doctor said our present technology can't even accurately detect for most steroids. For those that can, it leads to a false detection at some point. In fact, when discussing the current procedure, Di Pasquale laughed repeatedly about the public statements about them being unbeatable and better tests than the NFL or IOC because they don't hold water. Actually, Di Pasquale also said he wasn't familiar at all with the kind of testing the NFL does. McMahon used Di Pasquale's theories on his never-been-done-before testing procedures, and acted like they were being done at present when in fact, they won't be done until May, and even then they are theoretical rather than proven. McMahon's defense for saying that even though his claim of 15% of the wrestlers failing the most recent test before the Larry King show, and his claim that none of the wrestlers were on steroids on Larry King, which appears to be a contradiction, was because the 15% that failed were due to prior use of steroids causing a positive test result. This is possible because some steroids can be detected for 6 months. He later said that Dr. Anthony Daly, who heads up the current program, told him nobody had primary metabolites, which he claimed would denote current use, but they had metabolites showing use in the past. Di Pasquale said there was no way to determine how recent steroids used that show up in the test are, only that there were steroid metabolites found in the urine. He laughed at the statement that all of the 15% were due to prior usage. So we've got yet another credibility problem. Everything failing the test was supposedly based on, and most claims of the veracity and unbeatable nature of the current tests have turned out to be untrue. And now, nearly 5 months after testing started and nearly 9 months after the first announcement of steroid testing, and McMahon going on the USA Network talking about the WWF symbol assuring all our families of drug-free sports entertainment, we find out, well, that somebody had called wolf once again. But now we've got a new doctor, a new expert, a new magic, unbeatable test, and we're supposed to believe, even though no other sport has been able to devise an unbeatable test or even any kind of a test for certain drugs Di Pasquale claims he can detect. And I'm not even trying to say that this doctor isn't the real deal, nor this test isn't what he says it is, or that it is. But to take anything right now in regards to steroids and the WWF face value given the company's track record and, well, you know the saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice. Now in McMahon's defense, if you look at the wrestlers, there is no doubt steroid use in the WWF has decreased since November. My feeling here is that the wrestlers themselves, for the most part, who probably didn't have the technical knowledge of what the tests can and can't show, took what McMahon said at face value. They weaned themselves either off the drug since they were warned if they didn't they'd be suspended, and that does appear to be the case in some cases, or at least decreased the dosages because I believe most believed levels could be detected. I have to also believe many knew about testosterone bounce back because it's not a secret in steroid periodicals about the effect, and many wrestlers keep up on the latest drug literature. This means that if those wrestlers believed McMahon and were using testosterone, a drug of which levels can be detected. It meant they would decrease their doses but always stay on the low dose because going completely off would at some point trigger the increase in the levels, which would mean a suspension. Given that is the case, McMahon's statement on Larry King is even more ludicrous than it sounded at face value. But you can say there was some positive out of the program if it caused wrestlers to decrease their steroid doses to what would have to be tabbed as safer amounts. Given the prior out-of-control state of the organization and the business itself in some circles, it is an improvement even if deception was involved in creating the improvement. That's the same defense used back a decade ago when the U.S. Olympic Committee used to use the sink testing method, collecting urine samples from the athletes and say they were being tested for steroids, then pouring all the samples down the sink, and claimed it was successful because since the athletes didn't know the samples were being poured down the sink, it encouraged them to give up or decrease steroid use. Inevitably, when nobody tests positive, the athletes, and they generally know who is on and who is off, figure there is some sort of con going on. The result is a lack of trust and respect for the governing body and or authority figure for perpetuating a hoax and never trusting them again, but I guess in this case, nothing much is lost in that regard. Remember the independent agency McMahon said he was going to hire to investigate all these sexual harassment allegations? Well, it's been 2 weeks since he went on Larry King and Phil Donahue, and in that period, nobody who came forward with accusations has been contacted by the independent agency McMahon talked about on television. One would think the first people the agency, if there was a legit investigation, would try and contact would be Barry Orton, Tom Hankins, and Murray Hodgson, but no dice. Lex Luger made his first television appearance on WWF Superstars of Wrestling on Saturday, plugging both Wrestlemania and the debut of WBF Body Stars on Saturday morning on the USA Network. Luger, whose wrestling contract with WCW doesn't expire until the end of March in 1993. Kip Fry was furious during the middle of the week when he learned of this and told Mike Tenay of the Wrestling Insider's radio show, "I think it's the worst thing Lex Luger could do. It's very sad, but I have no more emotional attachment to Lex. I hope he gets Vince McMahon for a lot of money. The WWF are being slimeballs. The spirit of the contract wouldn't allow this to happen, but there's a loophole in the language. So what? I have no problem with Lex Luger in the WBF. If they want to be jerks about this, we just don't want to get tied up legally. As long as he doesn't wrestle or commentate on wrestling, it's okay." The hottest rumor leading up to Sunday's WrestleMania is that the Ultimate Warrior would be returning to the WWF. Obviously the rumor picked up a lot of momentum when the WWF aired the Hogan vs. Warrior match, which Warrior won from WrestleMania Vi on its USA Network special on Sunday night. Since long-standing WWF policy is to ignore the existence of any character that is no longer with the company, airing that match seemed out of place. Anyway, I can't either confirm or deny this one. Mania had reportedly 43,000 tickets out and 32,000 paid as of our last reports. The USA special was an amazing piece of work with definite attempts to turn all the negative media publicity and work its subtlety into the Flair Savage angle and even more indirectly into commentary and Hogan's final interview, which was one of the best babyface interviews I've ever seen, in which he said he'll make a decision when he leaves the ring whether or not it's his last match. Hogan's movie for post-WM is a go, although there is a lot of talk that this will be his final starring role unless this movie does box office. Anyway, expect Mania to be a hot show because it almost has to be, considering the company is somewhat under the gun now and will be even more in a few weeks. The future of John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight radio show in New York may be in danger. Arezzi's financial backer Vince Russo had a split with Arezzi after meeting with Vince McMahon on Tuesday, and Russo wanted Arezzi to lay off criticism of the WWF. Arezzi's show has gained cult popularity because he called things as he sincerely saw them, and he wasn't seeing things as so positive in regards to the WWF of late. Arezzi was on the show Sunday and said he was going to be starting his own newsletter, as opposed to the newsletter Russo did with him, that the show would be getting a new name since Russo Incorporated and owns the name. Both Russo and Arezzi are vying for control of the Wrestling Hour on WEVT. Arezzi signed a personal deal with the station for the show, which costs $1,000 per week for the airtime. However, the future is uncertain with his main sponsor backing out. Pet peeve number 166, all the newspaper stories that credit Vince McMahon taking wrestling out of smoky halls into major arenas. Even writers who have been fans before 1983 and should know better are writing this as if it's the gospel. Most of your major new arenas in the big cities, where the WWF generally runs, ban smoking. 10 years ago, very few arenas banned smoking. In most but not all major cities, the major arena in town housed the local wrestling promotion before Vince McMahon took the WWF nationwide. That is the only reason you sniff less smoke at wrestling matches today. I haven't sniffed any smoke at the last few WCW shows I've attended, and they've been in empty buildings in cities where years back you could have expected full buildings, and perhaps a smoky smell because those arenas had yet to ban smoking. The lack of smoke in the arenas has to do with a change in our society against smoking in enclosed public places, and absolutely nothing to do with Vince McMahon. Wrestling attendance was much higher during the territorial days than it was even at the peak of the WWF's popularity. It's one thing for new fans to not realize this because so much that isn't the case has been said so often the perception has become accepted as fact, but it's another when longtime fans forget that they used to attend shows before packed houses on a weekly basis a decade ago and nobody packs houses today, even though live shows are much fewer and far in between. While the wrestling business draws more gross revenue due to inflation and opening up so many new revenue streams like merchandising and 900 numbers, much of which McMahon deserves credit for implementing, this wasn't a dying business before 1984. It was a thriving business in many parts of the country. Some changes have been for the better and a lot may have been for the worst. These things aren't black and white, just like the cleaner air in your local wrestling arena really doesn't denote anything whatsoever about wrestling's popularity or even a change in demographics. Quick update on the situation with Van Hammer and Mr. Hughes from last week. Hughes didn't check into a drug rehabilitation center as reported last week, but is an outpatient and is undergoing therapy for a problem that isn't only a drug problem according to what Kip Fry stated this past week. Hughes is making some, but not all of his dates on the road at this point. Hammer has checked into a psychiatric facility for personal problems, and thus will be off the road until released. Kerry Von Erich was arrested last Tuesday when Dallas police discovered he wasn't attending his drug rehabilitation after being charged with 3 felony counts of trying to redeem falsified prescription drugs. A warrant for his arrest was sent out and Von Erich turned himself in and spent 2 hours in jail before being released on $7,500 bond. Von Erich said that he had already completed a drug rehabilitation program in California. He spent most of his 2 hours in prison signing autographs for the other prisoners. This story, which was reported on 2 television stations in Dallas, also said that Von Erich would return to the WWF at Wrestlemania. Billy Graham underwent a second hip operation last Wednesday in Southern California to replace the artificial hip that was put in about 5 years ago. This operation has nothing to do with steroid damage. Shortly after surgery, Graham suffered a partially collapsed lung and lost a lot of blood during the operation and post-operation period. Since he refused a transfusion, he was expected to remain in the hospital until his body could replenish its own blood, which should be Wednesday. Former pro wrestler Corsica Gene, 71, was shot and killed in a robbery at 3:30 a.m. this past Friday night at the bar he owned in Tampa. He was found by his wife at 6 a.m. Saturday. The Tampa police have an ongoing investigation and had no suspects as of Monday. Corsica Gene formed a tag team with Corsica Joe in the 1960s across the southern circuits. 1991 Observer Awards. Most disgusting promotional tactic. WWF exploits Persian Gulf War. WCW fires Ric Flair. WWF snake bite angle. Hogan lies on Arsenio. Hogan build Ed Wardle. Honorable mention Savage and Elizabeth Wedding. Slaughter turns back babyface. Previous winners. 1981 usage of the monster and saying he was built in a laboratory in Transylvania by LaBelle Promotions. 1982 Bob Backlund as WWF champion. 1983 pretending Eddie Gilbert had re-injured his neck in an angle after he suffered a legit broken neck in an auto accident by WWF. 1984 Blackjack Mulligan faking heart attack in Florida by CWF. 1985 usage of Mike Von Erich's near-fatal illness to sell Cotton Bowl tickets by World Class. 1986 equating an angle of Chris Adams' blindness with the death of Gino Hernandez by World Class. 1987 World Class handling of Mike Von Erich's death. 1988 Fritz Von Erich's fake heart attack by World Class. 1989 Jose Gonzalez babyface push. 1990 Atsushi Onita's stabbing angle with Jose Gonzalez in Puerto Rico. Best color commentator. Paul E. Dangerously. Bobby Heenan. Roddy Piper. Scott Anthony. Randy Savage. Honorable mention Scott Hudson, Jim Cornette, Freebirds. Previous winners. 1986 Michael Hayes. 1987 Jesse Ventura. 1988 Jesse Ventura. 1989 Jesse Ventura. 1990 Jesse Ventura. Reader's favorite wrestler. Ric Flair. Jushin Liger. Cactus Jack. Hiroshi Hazi. Jumbo Tsuruta. Honorable mention, Randy Savage. Bull Nakano, Terry Gordy, Toshiaki Kawada, Akira Hokuto, Chris Benoit, Kenta Kobashi, Negro Casas, Roddy Piper, Scott Steiner, Rick Steiner, Sid Justice, Owen Hart, Manami Toyota, Hulk Hogan, Shawn Michaels, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, Mr. Perfect, Legion of Doom, Keiji Muto. Previous winners: 1984 Ric Flair, 1985 Ric Flair, 1986 Ric Flair, 1987 Ric Flair, 1988 Ric Flair, 1989 Ric Flair, 1990 Ric Flair. Reader's Most Hated Wrestler: Hulk Hogan, Van Hammer, Jose Gonzalez, Jim Duggan, Andre the Giant. Honorable mention: Dustin Rhodes, PN News, Sid Justice, El Gigante, Sergeant Slaughter, Ultimate Warrior, Toshiaki Kawada, Lex Luger, Colonel Mustafa, Earthquake. Previous winners: 1984 Ivan Putski, 1985 Hulk Hogan, 1986 Hulk Hogan, 1987 Dusty Rhodes, 1988 Dusty Rhodes, 1989 Ultimate Warrior, 1990 Ultimate Warrior. Worst Wrestler: Andre the Giant, El Gigante, Oz, Bill Kazmaier, Sid Justice. Honorable mention: Junkyard Dog, Colonel Mustafa, PN News, Ultimate Warrior, Todd Champion, Warlord, Jim Duggan, Tiger Jeet Singh, Typhoon, The Berserker. Previous winners: 1984 Ivan Putski, 1985 Uncle Elmer, Stan Frazier, 1986 Mike Von Erich, 1987 Junkyard Dog, 1988 Ultimate Warrior, 1989 Andre the Giant, 1990 Junkyard Dog. Worst Tag Team: Giant Baba and Andre the Giant. Bushwhackers, Patriots, Natural Disasters, Freebirds. Previous winners: 1984 The Crusher and Baron von Raschke, 1985 Uncle Elmer and Cousin Jr., 1986 Junkyard Dog and George Steele, 1987 Jimmy Valiant and Bugsy McGraw, 1988 Bolsheviks Nikolai Volkov and Boris Zhukov, 1989 Powers of Pain, Warlord and Barbarian, 1990 Giant Baba and Andre the Giant. EMLL. The March 20th show at Arena Mexico in Mexico City saw Los Metallicos, Bronce and Oro and Plata, beat Felino and Comando Russo and Ponzonia in 2 out of 3 falls, ending with a series of spectacular dives at the end and everyone shaking hands to a big ovation. 2 1/4 star. Love Machine, Art Barr, and El Hijo del Solitario and El Hijo de Lismark beat La Fiera and Jerry Estrada and Blue Panther in 2 straight falls. Panther was pinned for both falls, in the second clean by Machine. I believe the mask versus mask match between the two, which probably will result in Barr being unmasked, will take place on television in 2 weeks. 2 3/4 stars. Los Brazos went to a double countout with Canadian Vampire Casanova and Conan and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. 2.5 stars, and in a singles grudge match. Pero Aguayo won 2 out of 3 falls from Sangre Chicana in 1835. In this match, Il Rafael Gato Montini was so partial to Chicana and kept letting La Fiera interfere so blatantly that the commission kicked him out of the match in midstream. Roberto Rangel refereed the 3rd fall with Aguayo gaining a clean pin. 3 stars. The Friday night crowds at Arena Mexico are averaging about 12,000 per week of late. A Hispanic weekly magazine reported that Conan was retiring to pursue an acting and singing career. Don't buy that one for a second. Last I'd heard Conan was going to WWF after WrestleMania, but it's been such a long time since I've heard it that it may have fallen through. A movie out called La Revancha starring Atlantis and Octagon is doing very well at the box office. Atlantis did a rare job in the main event on March 10th at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City, in the 3rd fall teaming with Blue Demon Jr. and Lismark to lose to Javier Cruz and Felino, and Pierre Roth Jr. Cruz made Atlantis submit to set up an NWA middleweight title match down the line. Octagon beat Bestia Negra in a mask versus hair match on March 11th in Mexico City. After the match, Negra tried to run away before getting his hair cut, but promoter Raul Reyes caught up with him, punched him and cut his hair, which got a big reaction from the fans. Some old-time fans may remember Reyes as a wrestler in the early 1970s in California for both Mike LaBelle and Roy Shire. Pierre Roth Jr. won the CMLL World Light Heavyweight title from Estrada in a battle of heels on March 19th in Cuernavaca. Pierre Roth gained a second title on March 22nd at Arena Mexico, teaming with Massacre and Jacques Mate as the Untouchables to win the CMLL World Trios title from the New Infernales. Pirata Morgan and Satanico and MS1. Semi-final on that card had Atlantis and Octagon and Black Magic, Norman Smiley, beat Panther and Fiera and Emilio Charles Jr. when Love Machine interfered in the third fall and caused Panther to be pinned. They did an American-style angle on television where Panther was doing an interview and Machine attacked him, although watching the angle with Panther doing the calm interview made Machine look like the heel, but it wasn't supposed to be that way. Fans still cheered Machine on television this weekend against Panther. Expect Ultimate Dragon, Yoshihiro Asai, to win the NWA World Light Heavyweight title from Liz Mark in April while both are on an SWS tour. Ciclone Ramirez beat De La Negra on March 21 in Mexico City in a mask vs. mask match while Blue Panther beat El Filosod to keep the CMLL World Middleweight title on the same show. March 21 in Xochimilco saw Canadian Vampire Casanova beat Bestia Negra 2 in a hair vs. hair match. Apollo Dantes also won a hair vs. hair match from Cacho Mendoza in Guadalajara. Octagon defended the Mexican middleweight title against Bestia Salvaje on March 26 in Cuernavaca. Chavo Guerrero is back working for this group. This coming weekend's Galavision show has Aguayo and Conan and Vampire vs. Chicana and Fiera and Cien Caras on top, Panther and Salvaje and Satanico vs. Love Machine and Atlantis and Octagon, Salomon Grundy and Dragon and Dandy vs. Los Brazos and Prelims. They are building to a hair vs. hair match with Javier Cruz vs. Apollo Dantes at Arena Mexico on a non-televised Sunday show. Probably the wrestler with the most respect among his peers of all the guys in this group is Fuerza Guerrera, according to one source. The other boys respect him as the supreme worker in the group and for his ability to make his opponent look great, I'm told, similar to the way WWF wrestlers respect Kurt Hennig and the way Ric Flair is respected as well. UWA. March 22 at El Torreo in Naucalpan saw Gigante Warrior and Buffalo Allen and Bull Payne, same Rick Gantner as in the US, beat Connect and Fantasma and Enrique Vieira via DQ. Fantasma subbed for Dos Caras in the main event when Caras missed the show because the wrestlers' union meeting went overtime. Also Negro Casas and Fishman and the Killer beat El Hijo del Santo and Sambra Negra and Gran Hamada in straight falls when Negra accidentally was hit by Santo, and he gave Santo a low blow and Santo was pinned in the second fall. Negra was unmasked by Santo last December in Monterrey, so they'll feud once again. Also Fantasma and Solari and El Coloso beat Rambo and Dr. Wagner Jr. and Babyface, Cajos and El Engendro and El Indomito beat Transformer, Kendo in Japan, and Celestial and El Psicodelico and Shu El Guerrero and Lobo Rubio, and El Hijo del Diablo beat Lasser and Kendo Star and Magnetic. March 29 at El Torreo in Naucalpan saw Vieira and Tinieblas Jr. and Sr. beat Casas and Fishman and Pegasus Kid. In the third fall, Vieira moved so Pegasus Kid dropkicked Fishman, who was pinned. Casas and Fishman then turned on Pegasus Kid, who was a natural babyface anyway, and left him laying. Also the Headhunters. Negra challenged Santo after the match to a UWA World Welterweight title match while Santo responded and issued a mask vs. hair challenge. Also in a battle of heels, the Death Missionaries, El Signo and Negro Navarro and Black Power 2, beat Bull Payne and Gigante Warrior and Killer via DQ, and Killer gave Signo a low blow. Fantasma and Solara beat Cajos I and El Engendro in Katana, and Alcone 78 beat Angel Mortal and El Falca. Friday's television taping in Netzahualcoyot was headlined by Rambo and Payne and Warrior vs. Dos Caras, and Villano 2 I and Vieira and Los Villanos vs. Death Missionaries. Dos Caras and Connect joined forces for a rare tag team against Payne and Warrior on March 27 in Tlalnepantla. Pegasus Kid Chris Benoit defends his WWF Light Heavyweight title against Villano 4 on April 3 in Netzahualcoyot, while Signo defends the UWA Light Heavyweight title against Villano V on the same card. All Japan. No big news except the continuation of the Champion Carnival Tour. March 29 in Nagano drew a sellout 2,800 as Jumbo Tsurita and Akira Tao and Masafuchi beat Toshiaki Kaoda and Mitsuharu Masawa and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi when Tsurita pinned Kikuchi with a back suplex in 29:57. Stan Hansen and Johnny Ace beat Master Blaster, Al Green, and Terry Gordy when Ace made Blaster submit. Steve Williams went to a 30-minute draw with Kenta Kobashi in a super match. Dan Crawford pinned David Isley. Danny Spivey and Doug Furness beat Kimala 2 and Abdullah the Butcher. Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura beat Motoshi Okuma and Haruka Eigen. Joel Deaton is out of action with an injury. March 28 in Fukui drew a sellout 3,800 as Misawa and Kobashi beat Tsurita and Fuchi when Kobashi pinned Fuchi in 24:18. Hansen and Ace and Furness beat Gordy and Williams and Blaster. Kawada made Spivey submit with the Dragon Sleeper in 12:16. Crawford pinned Ogawa, Tao pinned Isley, Kimala 2 beat Kikuchi, Abdullah pinned Mighty Inoue and Baba, and Kimura beat Eigen and Okuma. March 26 in Matsuzaka drew 1,500 as Misawa and Kobashi beat Hansen and Deaton, Kawada and Kikuchi beat Tao and Fuchi in 23:07, Surita pinned Ace, Wardy pinned Blaster, Spivey pinned Ogawa, Abdullah and Kimala beat Williams and Isley, Crawford and Furnace beat Mighty Inoue and Masao Inoue, and Baba and Kimura beat Eigen and Okuma. Television on March 22 taping opening night of the tour drew a 5.4 VR rating, a 3.8 Nielsen. While I haven't seen it yet, the Kobashi vs Kawada match on that television show is said to be the best match thus far of 1992. Next tour starts May 16. Spivey was brought back after a series of phone calls back and forth when it appeared he was done for good, but by doing the submission for Kawada, he's not held in as high a standing as before, and I believe this one tour is a trial, and he may or may not be back in the future. New Japan group is down right now until the junior heavyweight tour starts with the round-robin tournament with Jushin Liger, El Samurai, Osamu Matsuda, Negro Casas, Eddie Guerrero, Pegasus Kid, Flying Scorpio, from Denver, Norio Oniga, David Finlay, England, and Koji Kanemoto. Opening night is April 16 with Riki Choshu and Keiji Muto and Shinya Hashimoto vs Scott Norton and Tony Halme and Bad News Allen, Masachono vs Super Strong Machine, Akira Nagami and Takayuki Tsuzuka vs Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto, Liger vs Samurai, Casas vs Guerrero, Pegasus Kid vs Scorpio, and Kanemoto vs Oniga. Liger's major tournament matches will be April 19 against Guerrero, April 23 against Pegasus Kid, and April 29 against Casas. Tournament final will be the main event on April 30 at Tokyo Sumo Hall. Also on the show will be Kunyaki Kobayashi vs Akatoshi Saito in a wrestler vs karate match, Muto and Chono vs Big Van Vader and Bam Bam Bigelow in a non-title match, Choshu and Hashimoto vs Norton and Halme and Machine and Goto, and Hiro Saito vs Hiroshi Hazi and Nagami and Tsuzuka. Tour ends on May 1 at the Chiba Park Arena with Choshu vs Norton for the IWGP World Heavyweight title and Greatest 18 Club belts. Vader and Bigelow defend IWGP Tag titles against Muto and Hazi, Koshinaka vs Masashi Aoyagi in a wrestler vs karate match, Hashimoto vs Halme and Liger and Pegasus Kid team up for the first time in years against Samurai and Negro Casas. Masa Saito is out of action with an infected pancreas. The doctors wanted to perform surgery, but Saito was afraid that at his age, 48, it would spell the end of his career if he had to take a year off. Latest word is he'll be back hopefully by June or July. About the same time Kensuke Sasaki is expected to return. No contracts have been signed in regard to Hulk Hogan's proposed deal to work here, although New Japan wants him to debut on the January 4 Tokyo Dome show, which would be interesting politically since he'd be on a card loaded with WCW wrestlers, and in theory would be put on pay-per-view in the United States through WCW. The Los Angeles Times story on Hogan was reprinted in several mainstream Japanese newspapers, and I believe Hogan lost a commercial deal over the revelations regarding steroids and cocaine. Both major weekly wrestling magazines had major stories, with Weekly Pro Wrestling being extremely sympathetic to Hogan and portraying him as a scapegoat, while Weekly Gong covered it right down the middle, which is exactly the opposite of how I'd have expected it. The March 21 television show, headlined by Samoans and Vader vs Choshu and Chono and Muto, drew an 8.7 rating. Other Japan notes: SWS and PWF both have major shows in mid-April, with the SWS show headlined by Ric Flair vs Genichiro Tenryu for the WWF title, and PWF headlined by a mixed boxer versus wrestler match with Masakatsu Funaki vs Roberto Duran. Interesting that as of about 1 week ago, with both shows being promoted equally, that the Duran-Funaki match was outselling Flair Tenryu by nearly a 10-1 margin. Flair vs Tenryu will probably take place both on April 17 and April 18, with the first being a non-title and the second being for the title. UWFI has a major show on May 8 at the 17,000-seat Yokohama Arena, and they are going to declare their first champion with Nobuhiko Takada vs Gary Albright as the elimination match. The big news is that Koji Kiao, the ex-Sumo Grand Champion, will debut for this group against Kazuo Yamazaki. Kiao is said to have signed an incredible contract through Hachiro Tanaka, who is now aligned with this group as well supposedly. Kiao's contract is said to be for $75,000 per match, with a clause that he never has to do a job. It's one thing to sign Hulk Hogan to a deal like this with Tokyo Dome cards being able to be promoted, but how Kiao is worthy of a deal like this is totally beyond my comprehension. Also, Kiyoshi Tamura faces a light heavyweight boxer from the United States, and in an exhibition match, Billy Robinson faces Nick Bockwinkel with Luth as referee. Leon Spinks captured the WWA World Martial Arts title, beating Tarzan Goto on March 25 in Tokyo's Korakuen Hall before a sellout 2,100 fans with a second-round knockout. Also on the show, Eriko Tsuchiya became the WWA Women's Champion, beating Miwa Sato, plus Genghis Khan and Horace Boulder, and Big Titan beat Atsushi Onita and Samba Asako, and Amigo Ultra, Dr. Lucer from Calgary doing an insane asylum gimmick, beat Ricky Fuji. Lucer won the Awa Light Heavyweight title from Katsuji Ueda on March 23 in Soka before 3,825 fans. Onita and Goto beat Boulder and Titan. March 26 in Ichihara drew a sellout 3,032 as Spinks and Titan beat Onita and Asako, with Onita juicing like crazy for Spinks, Luther and Boulder over Shooter and Goto and Fuji no contest Ultra. March 28 in Tota drew a sellout 3,408 as Onita and Asako beat Boulder and Titan in a street fight, and Spinks and Lucer beat Fuji and Goto. March 29 in Tsuchiura drew a sellout 1,896 for an outdoor show in a rainstorm as Onita and Goto and Ultra beat Boulder and Titan, and Khan and Spinks KO'd Mr. Ganasuk. FMW building to a big show on May 24 at the 12,000-seat Ariake Coliseum, with Spinks defending the title against Onita. Tenryu will go to Wrestlemania. Rings had a show on March 26 at the Tokyo Gym and drew a sellout 8,500 for what apparently was an all-shoot card, with Masaki Sadake going to a draw with Marie Smith in the main event. Akira Maeda had what was called an exhibition 5 minutes with Koichiro Kimura rather than a shoot match. All Japan Women announced the top 5 matches at WrestleMania on April 25, which will be Bull Nakano vs. Asia Kong for the WWA Women's title. Bison Kimura defends the Pacific title against Toshio Yamada. Kyoko Inoue defends the IWA title against Manami Toyota, the 5-star match on the show, and Debbie Malenko and Seiki Hasegawa defend the Japanese tag team titles against Takako Inoue and Mariko Yoshida. Akira Hokuto and Etsuko Mita are now in Japan for EMLL. PWF has a mixed match with Yoshiaki Fujiwara vs. Don Nakia Nielsen, an ex-kickboxing star who had classic mixed matches many years ago against Akira Maeda, Fujiwara, and Keiichi Yamada for New Japan on May 15 in Osaka. Wing starts April 5 at Korakuen Hall in Tokyo with a barbed wire death match with Mitsutaru Tokuda and Yukihiro Kanemura vs. Mr. Pogo and Super Invader. Kevin Sullivan vs. Kimala plus Tugboat Taylor and Mongolian Mauler appear on the tour. USWA. March 23 in Memphis saw Kat Garrett pin Tony Falk and Cobra beat Dr. Death. Tony Anthony DDQ Eric Embry in a double juice pull-apart brawl. Kimala pinned Tom Pritchard to keep the USWA title. Brian Christopher beat Jimmy Valiant by using a chain to win the Southern title in a title versus title match. They seem to have now forgotten about the Texas title, which is just as well, since they don't promote in Texas, and Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett beat the Moondogs via DQ. In the main event, the jobbers from television all worked as lumberjacks and had chairs, but Moondogs beat up all the jobbers anyway. March 24 in Louisville saw Pritchard beat Falk, Christopher beat Garrett, Valiant beat Death, Anthony beat Embry via DQ, Moondogs and Big Black Dog beat Lawler and Valiant and Jarrett. March 28 in Jonesboro. Saw Falk beat Garrett, Embry beat Anthony, Pritchard beat Falk, Freezer Thompson beat Richard Lee via DQ. Christopher beat Valiant via DQ and Moondogs DDQ Lawler and Jarrett in a cage match. Business is still pretty good all things considered. Dr. Death and Nurse Cratchit I believe are history. Not sure of this, but believe Death was Kenny Kendall from Florida and Cratchit was Connie Cook. A new valet in town and named Lauren Davenport, and she's replaced Miss Jennifer. She came out and said she was introducing, after a lengthy talent search, the man of the 90s. No, it wasn't Murray Hodgson, it was Tony Falk. Anyway, she alternates between kissing Falk and slapping him. On television, Eddie Marlin announced that the opponents for the Moondogs called up, and when they found out who they were wrestling, said they didn't want to come, and Marlin said that's the first time he's ever heard of something like this. Moondogs got mad and said they wanted to beat someone up. The next match on television had Christopher defending the Southern title against Garrett, and the Moondogs attacked Garrett and beat him up until Lawler and Jarrett made the save. March 30 in Memphis has Kat Garrett vs. Don Bass, Ricky Hayes vs. Big Black Dog, Falk vs. Pritchard, Anthony vs. Embry in an anything goes match, Christopher vs. Valiant for the Southern title, Kimala vs. Coco Ware for the USWA title, where will almost surely regain the title since Kimala is leaving for Japan, and Moondogs and Richard Lee vs. Lawler and Jarrett and mystery partner. Lawler was on WMC Radio in Memphis for 2 hours this past Thursday night talking about the People magazine article on Hulk Hogan. Lawler, on his Sunday morning television show, said he'd be talking about it and showed the magazine on the air. He said he'd tell the truth about Hogan on the radio. I don't know exactly what he said, but the tone of it was that the article was correct and he really put down Hogan and the WWF and tried to make a point that USW or wrestling has absolutely nothing to do with the WWF and wanted to disassociate themselves from anything the WWF has done. Global. They held the first non-television taping house show on March 27 in Dallas, which drew about 500 fans as Gary Young, soon to be turning heel, drew with Stephen Dane the Viper, Mike Davis, pinned New Kid Tony Williams, Bruce Pritchard pinned referee James Beard after hitting him with a loaded glove given to him by the Dark Patriot. Bill Irwin won the GWF Brass Knucks title from Black Bart in a first blood match when Skander Akbar's attempt to throw powder at Irwin caught Bart instead, and then Irwin punched Bart, who bled. Terry Sims and Scott Putski kept the GWF tag team titles, beating John Tatum and Rod Price when Stephen Dane tried to interfere after a ref bump, but Sims gave him a bulldog headlock and pinned him, and in the main event, Eddie Gilbert won the North American title from his brother the Dark Patriot via submission with the figure 4 leg lock. The stipulations were that if Gilbert lost, he'd have to leave the GWF for 1 year, which may as well be forever. Both juice since there was no television cameras. April 3rd at the Sportatorium will have a 15-man elimination tag team match with the final survivor becoming the GWF television champion, which is now held up. Gilbert defends the North American title against Dark Patriot with Gilbert's hair and the belt up against the mask. Irwin defends with Brass Knucks title against Bart with a double pole with a horseshoe and branding iron on top of the respective poles. Barry Horowitz defends the GWF light heavyweight title against Danny Davis and Bruce Pritchard versus James Beard in a boxing match. Here and there. Billy Jack Haynes had segments on the ABC and CBS local news broadcasts in Portland calling for a boycott of the WWF and also aired on the local evening magazine show and AM Northwest. Tatsumi Fujinami is going to Europe to work for Otto Wanz, as is Stan Hansen, Bob Orton and Dory Funk in July. Larry Sharp's longtime lawsuit with Bam Bam Bigelow over a breach of contract was settled this past week after a week-long court case. Sharp testified for 6.5 hours on Tuesday, Bigelow for 4.5 hours on Wednesday, and the jury ruled in favor of Bigelow. Sharp was suing, saying Bigelow breached his contract where Sharp agreed to train him for free in exchange for a percentage of Bigelow's earnings for the first few years of his career. Bigelow broke away and went on his own, and Sharp was suing for his percentage. Jim Cornette's Smoky Mountain Wrestling is running their first big show on May 22 in Knoxville, which will have an 8-man tournament to determine the first singles champion and the finals of the tag team tournament. The singles tournament tentatively has Brian Lee, Paul Orndorff, Tony Anthony, Robert Gibson, Jimmy Golden, Tim Horner, Scott Armstrong, and Buddy Landell. Universal Championship Wrestling debuts May 1 in Nashua, New Hampshire using Killer Kowalski students. Motor City Wrestling had a double shot on March 21 with an afternoon shopping mall show in Lima, Ohio as the Wild Bunch beat the Nightmares in 47 minutes, and an evening show before 750 at the Civic Center as Wild Bunch beat Kansas Outlaws to win the ICW US Tag Team title. Next show in Lima, Ohio will be April 17 with Wild Bunch vs. Nightmares. Eastern Championship Wrestling on March 24 at the Sports Bar in Philadelphia included J.T. Smith and D.C. Drake beating Larry Winters and Johnny Hotbody in what was said to have been a super match, with Drake turning heel on Smith, and they left Smith, 3 refs, the ring announcer, a female ring attendant and a fan laying in the ring when the carnage was over. Glenn Osborne threw fire to beat Jimmy Jannetty, and Ivan Koloff beat Tony Stetson in a chain match. Jimmy Snuka appears on April 25 and April 26 for this group. The Sheik and Abdullah Farouk Jr. have taken Pro America Championship Wrestling promoter Tom Cusati to court for monies for an independent show they appeared on. Sunflower State Wrestling has shows April 6 in McPherson, KS, and April 12 in Hoisington, Kansas. Ron McFarlane, who worked for Geigel years back, is the booker for this group. Chief J. Eagle, Gary Bragg, ran a show on March 21 in Inman, South Carolina before a sellout 350 fans as he and Wahoo McDaniel beat the Hollywood Blondes in the main event. One of the guys who works for this group, Mike Somani, who has done jobs on Atlanta TV, still wrestles despite suffering from multiple sclerosis. IWF on April 4 in Tampa and Golden Nugget Flea Market has Blackjack Mulligan versus the Possessor, Ned Brady, plus Kendall Windham versus the Stomper Underneath. Female boxer Chris Christopher, who worked a tour using the boxer gimmick for FMW, recently competed against the American Gladiators at a show this March 27 at Chicago Stadium. West Coast Wrestling Association starts back up on May 10 in Fresno at Holiday Inn Center Plaza. Jalisco Promotions drew 125 on March 29 in Los Angeles, has Crazy Boy at Gory Chavez beat Pilato Suicida and Apache in a fantastic main event. Carlos Mata ran a show that afternoon in Rialto with many of the same boys drawing 75. April 5 at the All Nations Center in Los Angeles had a blindfold battle royal. A lucha-style show on March 28 in Santa Ana sold out to the tune of about 450 fans with Trident and Alpha Negro DDQ Gory Chavez and Cesar Sando Jr. in a great match. Next show is April 11th with Suicida vs. Crazy Boy on top. Jake Milliman beat Conan the Dark Rider on March 28 in Kenosha, Wisconsin for the IWA before a reported 1,550 fans. Big D Pro Wrestling drew 170 fans on March 29 in Dallas using Stephen Dane beating Terry Daniels, Iceman King Parsons, and Action Jackson beat John Tatum and Rod Price. Jackson collapsed as a shoot with breathing problems and needed to be rushed to the hospital. Billy Travis beat Kenny the Stinger in the main event. April 5th as Price vs. Daniels, Jimmy James and Miss Judy and Eric Fontaine vs. Ray Evans and CJ and Awesome King, Parsons vs. Tatum and Travis vs. Stinger with the title on a pole. Coming soon to this group are Steve Simpson, Jeff Gaylord, Bull Payne and Giant Warrior. March 28 in Caguas, Puerto Rico saw Ron Garvin beat Invader No. 1 via DQ. Finish saw Texas Hangman Killer interfere and Carlitos Colon make the save. The ref, who was bumped when Killer ran in, only saw Colon, so he DQ'd Invader. Invader was furious because he blamed Colon for losing his shot at the Universal title, and it was later announced Garvin would defend against Colon shortly. Expect the Colon vs. Invader feud to begin after that match. Other results saw Heartbreaker Adonis pin Rex King, El Exotico beat El Corsario, Rockin' Rebel beat Randy Rhodes, Colon beat Killer, Miguelito Perez and El Bronco No. 1 drew Ron Starr and Doug Masters, and La Ley and Sasha beat Fidel Sierra and La Tigresa in a mixed match. Killer Kowalski ran a show on March 27 in Bellingham, Maine and drew 1,500 fans with Mike Sharp and Honky Tonk Man as the top draws. WWF. Jake Roberts and Roddy Piper both missed a few main events shots over the weekend, and were replaced by Sid Justice and Undertaker respectively during the midweek dates. First WWF show at the Meadowlands will be July 10th. I don't believe they'll be back in Madison Square Garden until August, but will be running regularly at the Nassau Coliseum, which seems to be the easiest arena to draw in. The March 23 MSG show with Flair and Justice vs. Hogan and Piper only drew around 9,000 fans, which had to be a major disappointment since that match has generally done very well everywhere else. March 28 in Sacramento drew $8,600 and $107,000 and Chris Walker pinned Kato 1 1/2 star, Owen Hart and Coco were beat Beverly Brothers 2 1/4 stars. Crush pinned Berserker Dud. Natural Disasters beat Jim Duggan and Sergeant Slaughter via DQ when Duggan was caught using the 2x4 Dud. Natural Disasters don't even attempt to play faces during these matches. Repo Man pinned Jim Powers Dud. British Bulldog pinned Ted DiBiase 1 3/4 stars. And Hogan and Piper beat Justice and Flair when Hogan pinned Flair with a clothesline 3 stars. Piper was on a Sacramento radio station Monday night to plug Mania, and the DJ asked him about steroids and he said he tried them a few years ago but stopped when he found out they could kill you. The person listening said he was more honest than you'd expect throughout the interview, but the way he gave that answer made him no more honest than Hogan, since Zahorian's testimony at the trial made it pretty clear Piper used steroids from him regularly for many years. TV ratings saw Primetime on March 23 get a 2.8 rating and All-American on March 22 get a 2.2. Primetime on March 16 did a 2.4 while All-American on March 15 did a 2.1. March 29 at the Palace in Auburn Hills, Michigan drew 6,000 as Repo Man pinned Powers 1/4 1 star. Owen Hart and Ware beat Beverly Brothers 1 1/2 star, Ware worked most of the match. Crush pinned Berserker 3/4 1 star. Natural Disasters beat Slaughter and Duggan via DQ -2 stars. Walker pinned Kato 1 star. Bulldog pinned DiBiase Dud and Hogan and Savage beat Justice and Flair via DQ and Harvey Whippleman hit Hogan with the bag. 2.5 stars. March 27 in Montreal saw Rick Martel beat JW Storm, Tatanka pinned Colonel Mustafa, Warlord pinned Jim Brunzel, Bushwhackers and Bret Hart beat Nasty Boys and Jacques Rougeau, banned from using Mountie name in Canada. Shawn Michaels pinned Virgil, IRS drew Tito Santana and Justa. Sub for Jake, beat Savage in a cage match. March 25 in Seattle drew 7,000 as Walker beat Kato, Crush pinned Berserker, Repo Man pinned Powers, Bulldog pinned DiBiase, Disasters beat Duggan and Slaughter via DQ, Owen Hart and Ware beat Beverly Brothers and Savage pinned Roberts in a cage match. March 27 in Albuquerque drew 5,000 as Walker pinned Kato 1 star. Crush pinned Berserker 1 star. Disasters beat Slaughter and Duggan via DQ Dud. Repo Man pinned Powers 1 star, Bulldog pinned DiBiase 2 stars. Owen Hart and Ware beat Beverly Brothers 2 stars and Undertaker, subbing for Piper, beat Flair in a cage match. DiBiase interfered freely, giving Flair the urn, but Undertaker would come back from the dead. Finally, Undertaker laid out both Flair and DiBiase with the urn and walked out of the cage to win. They left with the title belt since it was never announced as non-title, and the fans left thinking it was a title change. 2.5 stars. March 28 in Los Angeles drew $7,000 and $105,000 as Walker pinned Kato. 2.5 stars. Owen Hart and Ware beat Beverly Brothers. 2 1/4 stars. Undertaker pinned Berserker. 1 3/4 stars. Natural Disasters beat Slaughter and Duganda. Repo Man pinned Powers. 3/4 1 star. Bulldog pinned DiBiase. 1/4 1 star, and Hogan and Piper beat Flair and Justice. 3 1/4 stars. March 26 in Winnipeg saw Brunzell pin Mustafa. 2 stars. Martel pinned Storm. 1 1/2 star. Michaels pinned Santana. 3 1/2 stars. Bushwhackers and Bret Hart beat Roju and Nasty Boys. 2 1/4 stars. IRS pinned Virgil with a briefcase to the nose. 2 star. Tatanka pinned Warlord. 1 1/2 star, and after a 25-minute intermission, Savage beat Justice in a 4-minute cage match via DQ, and Justice used a chair dud. WCW. Expect the NWA World Tag Team Tournament Finals to come down to an 8-team tournament at the Bash in Philadelphia on July 12. The NWA World Heavyweight Title Tournament will probably take place from August 7 to August 12 in Japan. Highlights from the TV taping on March 20 in Topeka before more than 5,000 fans. I'm sure it was heavily padded, for worldwide tapings with Tony Schiavone and Jesse Ventura that start airing this coming weekend. Brian Pillman, working with a bad back, still out of action in house shows, beat Brad Armstrong to keep the light heavyweight title in a good action match. Freebirds beat Cactus Jack and Diamond Dallas Page. Barry Windham and Dustin Rhodes beat Vegas and Page. Arnold Anderson and Bobby Eaton kept the tag titles, beating Ron Simmons and Big Josh when Anderson hit Josh with the phone. JT Southern beat Chip the Firebreaker. Big Van Vader pinned Marcus Bagwell with 4 splashes off the top rope until Sting made the save. Terrence Taylor pinned Tom Zenk due to outside interference from Greg Valentine. Rick Steiner pinned Eaton with a belly-to-belly in a great match. Zenk pinned Page. Freebirds beat Taylor and Valentine via DQ for an over-the-top rope call. Rick Rude beat Steamboat via DQ, and Steamboat used a chair, and Sting pinned Steve Austin to keep the WCW title. Television taping March 25 in Gainesville before a sellout 2,000. No padding whatsoever, as in top matches. Anderson pinned Brad Armstrong. 3 stars. Vegas pinned Todd Champion dud. Steiners beat Page and Richard Morton. 1 1/2 star. Cactus Jack double countout Junk Food Dog dud. Freebirds beat Eaton and Zabishko with Larry doing the job dud. Austin and Rude end. Anderson beat Zenk and Armstrong and Bagwell. 1 1/2 star. Wyndham and Simmons beat Cactus and Zabishko in a dark match. During a Scotty Flamingo squash, JT Southern came out, so they'll probably have them form a tag team and program them with Freebirds. With his new perm, Flamingo looks literally spook, at least to me. Nikita Koloff beat Steve Armstrong. Taylor and Valentine beat Armstrong and JYD. Vader and Rude beat Patriots, and Steiners beat Eaton and Anderson via DQ in a dark match when Medusa did a run-in. The Steiners had a squash with Tony Mella and Greg Sawyer, and there were major screw-ups during the match, and you know what happens when there are major screw-ups during a Steiners match, so this won't air, and they did a retake later in the show. Mella didn't go up right for a backdrop, so Rick threw him over the top rope and he landed on his head. Sawyer came off the ropes too slow twice, which screwed up both attempts at Frankensteiners. Viewers' Choice is now saying Super Brawl did a 1.0 buy rate. Television ratings saw on March 21 WCW did a 2.8 and Power Hour a 2.1, which is really strong for that time slot. Main Event on March 22 also did a 2.8. Previous weeks saw Main Event do a 2.7, WCW a 2.5 and Power Hour a 2.0. March 28 in Worcester, Massachusetts drew 3,500 and Mike Graham pinned Morton. 1 1/2 star. Vader pinned Bagwell. 1 star. Johnny B. Bad beat Cactus Jack via countout. 2 stars. Taylor pinned Page, who played face. 1 1/4 stars. Wyndham and JYD beat Austin and Zabishko in a bunkhouse match billed as an elimination tag but wasn't. 3 stars. Simmons pinned Vegas. -2 stars. Steiners beat Anderson and Eaton via DQ. 3 1/4 stars, and Sting pinned Rude in 1906 to retain the title. 2 1/2 stars. Rhodes missed with Weekend with a disc problem in his back. Last I'd heard is he's expected back in about 10 days. Both Rude and Dangerously have reached verbal agreements for new contracts. I believe both 2 years in duration, although I don't think either contract has actually been signed yet. The March 29th show at the Baltimore Arena drew 3,800 paid and $32,000, but with all the 2-for-1s and freebies and discounts, etc., there were in excess of 7,000 fans in the building. Mike Weber, who worked PR for the WWF in the mid-1980s before going to work for Donald Trump, is headed here to head the PR department in a few weeks. March 27 in Chicago, Drew 2,300 as Morton pinned Graham, Vader pinned Bagwell, Taylor pinned Page, Simmons and Josh beat Vegas and Mr. Hughes, Wyndham and JYD beat Austin and Zbyszko via DQ and Cactus Jack interfered. Best match on the card, Cactus pinned Steiners beat Anderson and Eaton via DQ and Sting pinned Rude to keep the title. There has been a lot of local publicity regarding fans' decision to drop Jesse Ventura from doing the Minnesota Vikings broadcasts for next season. Several reasons were given, one of which was that he was announcing wrestling. Ventura is trying to make a move to television and get on the broadcast team for the televised NFL games on TNT or College Game.